It's really nice to meet all of you right now in this platform, the best way possibly we could ever meet. So, the topic today we are going to be talking about is catering to the 1%. When we say that, I think all of us we do have a situation in our career where we find this 1% of the clientele that we have to provide something more than what we generally do. Now, when you talk about it, it's mostly in the segment of luxury. But what exactly is luxury is what we generally define in terms of the designs that we develop for these kind of clienteles. So it's not always necessary to. I mean, I hope you all will agree. It's not always necessary to go for a brand and an expensive product to make it luxurious to cater to this kind of clientele. But there is something more to that. So, yeah, talking about the same topic, I would like Zaki to express how has he taken clients head on with these kind of situations.
Actually, Manish, the when you have this topic of 1% versus the 99%, actually we have to dwell back into actually a country, because design is also part of economics. So we actually a poor country. Realistically, we are going there in the future, and I'll give you like a number. India has a GDP of about $2,000 per capita. Now, while Thailand has a thing of about $7,500 per capita. When you go to Thailand, we say it's a developing country, it's far better done than us, infrastructure is better, design is better. So what happens is, for us, it is yet, kapda makan. We've not reached the stage of actual design for the common person. So I think before we talk about, the rich is the rich. We all fortunately or unfortunately catering to the 1% in India. Because of beyond the 1 or 2, 3%, there's not enough money for us to make. We will not be in this panel, we will not be affording this laptop also that we're talking from.
Yes.
So I think design in India being a function of a cost, and the country that we are in, unfortunately, we are going to have this divide for a certain period of time. And I don't think this is going to close anytime soon. I hope in the next 10 years we make more money. We were from where we were 10 years ago, the country to today what we are. I'm very optimistic about our country. I think there's a lot of future that we have, and there's a lot of progress we are going to make. But I think this 99% to 1% is going to remain for a while. I don't know what Matrand or Satyajit have to think about this, but I would love to hear their views on this.
Yeah, Matrand, your take on this? Because I completely agree from what Zaki was saying. India, as much as we try to call ourselves developing country or we have reached the future, we are really not, for that matter. But end of the day, there is still an issue of that 1%, and no matter whichever country or whichever part of this world we go to, we still are going to find that 1% who always wants to be completely different from the rest of the 99, and that's the whole concept of the signal.
Sorry, I'll just say one second. This 1% that we have is a global citizen. He makes more money than guys in America and Europe. Right?
True.
So while the guy in America and Europe makes $66,000 per capita per year, we are at not even 10%. We are 2% of that number. So we have to see it from the realistic lens. So, over to you guys on this.
Matrand,
I'm impressed with your per capita and nationwide knowledge. Worldwide.
I'm a Marwadi by religion. I'm only Muslim by birth.
It's very interesting. So I think that the point Zaki makes is an interesting one. I mean, just to kind of add another dimension to the conversation, I would like to. I mean, one of the thoughts what I essentially believe in is that I don't think that I would necessarily personally equate design with spending and budget per se. I mean, if we historically look at the modernist movement, it arrives at the turn of the 20th century with ideas that are very much about not designing luxury. It is about actually designing for the masses. So what we now see as modernist designs, whether they are cantilevered houses in LA or whether they are fancy, bungalows in Alibag and all, a lot of that actually stems from ideals of modernism, which was very much entrenched in the social political kind of vision for the future at the turn of the 20th century. So to say that good design can only be limited to the 1% is wrong, because actually the whole idea of the foundations of the design that most of us practicing architecture globally sit on are actually were fundamentally anchored by designing social housing. They come into even within India, if you look at Chandigarh or other spaces, these are all big social experiments in contemporary modern design. I think where we falter as a country, and here I think that it's important to see that I don't think perhaps the richness of the country has anything to do with it, but it is about the vision that the country or the direction that we want to go in says a lot about it. So if you look at comparable countries, whether you look at and Latin America has a lot of such countries. You can look at Brazil. You can look at architecture in more recently Colombia. I think that the kind of public housing and projects and buildings that have been coming up are phenomenal. So, but I think what happens over the years, I think from the 60s onwards, there's a steady decline in interest in architecture and the belief that architecture actually can create a difference within society and in nation building. So over time, I think the government stops being kind of the facilitator of good design for the 99%. So what happens is that, okay, so then design starts to become purchased. And I think that there are several people who would be very happily, working for housing. I mean, even if we look at the practices of Mr. Rajriwal or Doshi, you look at the Aranya housing in Indore and all, for which Mr. Doshi won the Aga Khan Award. I mean, this is where there was good design happening. It wasn't necessarily linked to how much money is spent on it, And I think that you look at the number of Pritzker prizes that have been won in South America. It's really heartening to see, and a lot of those people are doing kind of social housing. Now you see a lot of sort of wonderful green shoots of such projects in Bangladesh as well. So I don't think it's to do with. I think for me it's a shame, but there is a lack of patronage actually. Otherwise, I think that we could be really looking at some very, very interesting trajectories of Indian architecture and good design, which is not necessarily at all linked. I mean, at the same time, even if we remove the government out of the conversation and we look at corporates as people who search for it. I mean, you look at Escorts in the early years, hiring Joseph Allen Stein to do their factories and the housing structures that were happening. And the corporate India, like if you think about employment in India, 10% of it is organized sector, 90% is unorganized sector. So 90% is for whom, the government has to be building, whether it's primary health centers and all, and bring in architects. The minute you make architects on the lowest bid kind of process and complicated systems that they have, then a lot of the guys drop out. And so I don't think that I would necessarily equate kind of design with the 1%. I just equated the fact that we're at 1% is a lack of support and clients from various aspects. So I'm just kind of giving a contrarian view here for the conversation.
Yeah, it makes sense. What you said did mean a lot. In fact, I think Satyajit, I have been seeing your work lately in different media houses about how you transform house to be not the 99% of the house. So when I say that the 99% of the house, it does not mean like a standardized design, but something unique, something that makes it feel different and nice at the same time with a lot of meaning to it. So do you only cater to the 99% or do you cater to the 1%?
I think you try and cater to, you wish you could cater to 99%, but end of the day, it boils down to the sensitivity of the people. And it also, as I think what Zaki and Martin both sort of talked about various aspects of it. If you go back traditionally, where we sort of started, where the good architecture sort of came after a certain kind of stability. You had different empires, if you take care of Hampi, or even if you see some areas in northern India where once the sort of the governments or the governance found some sort of stability, then it's sort of what started developing along with that was art and architecture and like the other aspects of our lives. However, like now, I mean, if you, as Zaki was saying, like correctly, I mean, we are still fighting the elections on the basis of water and electricity. So somewhere, I think you also are looking for kind of a stability where you sort of go beyond just like paid bharne se aage ka. Once you start thinking about that, then other aspects really start like they start to matter. So I think that it works on both level. A is like this stability to sort of think beyond what you have, and also like the sensitivity that sort of I think we are partly losing it with time. I think at least like back days you had. Now we are like have too many resources. Like there, I mean, it has become rather hard to choose from what you have. At least, I mean, if you see like Rajasthan or the older cities where maybe the palaces were built out of stones and wood, or like there were largely intricate sort of art was there, but still for the rest of the house they had some sort of design sense to it, and which essentially came from the material and the craft which was prevalent in like everyday practice, and that is getting vanished, and that you can see even the kind of work which largely happens in India. We are either trying to copy something that you see outside, and that has also become our parameters of progress. I mean, you can even see politicians talking like that we want to turn Konkan into California, which why do you want to do that where Konkan itself is so beautiful? So our parameters have also changed, unfortunately. So I don't know.
So
Sorry,
I
sorry.
actually
Go
have
ahead.
something to say. So, the thing is that I think design knowledge in India is changing slowly, but it is changing. For example, every now builder wants to make a nice facade. Every builder now wants to have a nice showcase apartment, right? Because that sells. So good design sells, and Indians are understanding that eventually slowly. But the biggest spender in the country is always the government. And I
Yeah.
think our government is yet slightly tone deaf to good design. For whatever parameters, whatever reasons, maybe as architects, we are failing our job to push better in the country to make more sense. For example, look at the flyovers being made in Mumbai or the metro being made in Mumbai. It could have been made aesthetically well also, but it looks like a structural engineer, and I have nothing against structural engineers, but it's like a structural engineer has picked it up from his second year of engineering college and has made the whole thing. There's no thought, there's no nothing, there's no creativity, there's not one iota of there must be design intelligence in it for sure, but there's no aesthetic intelligence in it. You could have achieved something which would also aesthetical, which would also made something which would add to the city. But unfortunately, I don't think that because when, as Satyajit said, that when it comes to the absolute common man, and the government is trying to project themselves to the absolute common man and not to us. So their perspectives to things is very different. So for example, this one whole thing that every time I see it when I go to parts of Mumbai which is doing this metro, I just completely don't understand what have we done. The same government has made the international airport, but there was a private enterprise that made it, right? So the international airport in Mumbai is spanking, the private airport in Delhi is spanking. So, but it's a dichotomy. It's two extremes in a. So I think for us to reach a common ground is going to take some time because we are very far away yet. From what public enterprise is trying to do and what private enterprise is trying to do, and what the government is trying to do. It's slightly. I don't know. I can't speak for the government, but as a citizen, I can see and I feel disappointed sometimes.
So, Martin, one big question. Now, when it comes to 99%, do you feel there is a difference in your process as an architect to produce a design for the 99% versus the 1% clients that you have? So, does it change anything anywhere, or is it only about the money that talks about the design, or is there a design value which is also added to it?
No, look, I think with every project it changes the challenges, and so if I was to make it's difficult to kind of make a broad stroke kind of comment on like that how the design for the 99% if one is designing is fundamentally different. But yes, of course, I mean the whole aspect of it is that cost comes into it, right? So when cost comes into it, there are very interesting kind of dynamics that come into design, right? Because You then have to look at natural cooling. You have to then look at kind of, things that, let's say, if you are designing for the 1% who wants a glass box in the middle of Delhi in the middle of June to kind of be in and pump it with air conditioning, it would be a very different thing. So yes, of course, I mean, budgets comes into it. But I think one goes back to more fundamental ideas of kind of, how architecture can be practiced in a sense. I think a lot of technology has allowed us to overcome a lot of climactic hurdles, for instance. Money has allowed us to overcome material hurdles, right? So like 20 years ago, you couldn't get a facade from like Vienna to be brought in here and put on a building, or a tap from, Taiwan. So I think that, and equally with equipment and stuff. So I think that, yes, I think the trajectories of when you start to design for the wealthy are going off in tangents that kind of, they're fun to do as an architect at some level, because, you can really be adventurous with your design, and you can have structures that allow things to happen that would not be possible with the more meager design. But at the same time, it's important to kind of, bring in a certain sense of consciousness to the design, which I always try and do when we're working for even the 1%. Saying, look, like let's make it. I think like how Satyajit was saying, let's make it sort of relevant for India. Let's make it relevant for Indian materials, Indian climates, and then of course we can do luxury, or if one is required to. But when it comes to the 99%, I think that you think slightly differently. Obviously, I think that's important, and so the processes of how you approach it become different because you are addressing different problems. But all equally challenging.
Yeah, I think, and the best part of this is like, those two processes are always sort of complementing each other. I mean, sometimes, you're sort of like forced to take certain decisions, or forced to a situation where you have to sort of make a decision out of what you have. So I think you always are getting something back from when you're like sort of doing something for, say, 99%, or I mean, saying 99 almost sounds like 99% of people don't have money, but it's honestly, when like you do those kind of projects, could be like maybe just 1% of your practice, but you get something out of it. So almost like, I mean, I cook a lot, so most of the analogies come from cooking. So there are days you just open the fridge, find out what you have, and you cook something out of it, and something that you create on that day, you may not probably do it even when you have an open pantry. So what you get out of it is, I think, very important, and what you are sort of try and achieve with those limited resources. Sometimes you can take back that to your otherwise like 1% people.
So Satyajit, there is one more question for you.
Okay.
Now, keeping aside the financial aspect of it, would you design your projects differently for the 1% just because you have the comfort to know that there is a flexibility in the cost, or do you forcefully try to put in things which are quite expensive so that it looks like a 1% project?
I don't think like that process doesn't, I mean, end of the day, like we are deeply involved with our clients, it's very important to understand the kind of people they are. I mean, look at the houses of, say, like Narayan Murthy. I mean, if he comes to you to design his house, the kind of person he is, the kind of architecture will follow, so there is no, so it's end of the day, it boils down to the people you are dealing with. Like, houses come with agenda, right? I mean, there are certain people who are trying to project themselves in a certain way through architecture or through the interior spaces, whereas for few or for many, like the house is a very personal space. So it boils down to the personality end of the day. So even if that person may have like tons of money, but for us that doesn't quite change the expense part, or like the doesn't mean like we will end up putting gold, but sometimes if you want to have a copper, I would certainly go for that.
Okay, so we have two interesting questions, so I'm going to put it forward, and I think this one will go to Martin. So how can we convince a client from the 99% that they should opt for a design solution that is both aesthetic as well as functional for them, but it also comes at a price? This is by Rohit Jain. So I think you're the perfect person to answer this.
Okay. So I think let's talk about what we mean by the 99%, because I think it's difficult to just kind of talk numerically here. So when I'm talking about 99%, I mean let's say buildings that are not necessarily commissioned by the 99%, but these are buildings that are commissioned for the 99%. So I think there's a fundamental difference between that, and by that I mean a bus stop can be for the 99%, a museum can be for the 99%, a polyclinic, a hospital is for the 99%. I mean, for the 100%, but let's say that the majority of users of, let's say, public hospitals, public bus transport systems, museums would be these people. So I think that the conversation now, if we look at how India builds its residential buildings, let's not forget that architects are probably designing only about 2 or 3% of those buildings. And I'm probably including within this all the builders and the townships and all coming up, because when you really look across tier 2, tier 3 cities, villages, everyone, these are all self-built buildings. So they are, and they're incremental architecture. So it's an architecture that evolves, which is need-based. So I think that Sameep in Bombay has done some work on this in certain aspects of Bombay. But in Delhi, it's very much like that. What are called, semi-urban spaces, semi-legal, do kamre bana diye. Then bete ka shadi ho gaya, then you go and you do one more room up there. Then you get a little bit money, then you build another one. Then some very intricate stairs are going up. And so this is how actually the majority of residential architecture across the country is coming. Like, it is not designed, it's either owner driven or the Mistri driven,
Yeah.
That's the mystery of architecture. Bad joke. But I mean, so I think that I think what would be interesting, for instance, so let's say when the transition in Europe was happening from urban slums into social housing, and they were trying to move people in, the question that you put about convincing about aesthetics and spending more, before I almost come to that, I would almost look at it from a public health point of view. So let's say that when we're right now in the middle of a pandemic. Now, what was happening in, let's say, the slums of London in the 19th century was that the prevalence of TB and other such illnesses was phenomenal, because architecture was not, because it was self-built, it was haphazardly built, very much like what we have. The first things that I would say that people must look at would be more like natural ventilation, sunlight. Two simple things, because when you start building back to back and vertically up and all, you don't get this. There's a phenomenal decline in the population health. So I think those would be more interesting points to sort of bring in before we start to bring in ideas of aesthetics. In fact, even now aesthetic does come in a sense. Even poor people, when they're building houses, whenever they have a little bit extra money, it's the way it's painted for, let's say, just before a wedding, or the way it may be decorated. And also, I think that people want that aesthetic. Everyone has this desires for aesthetic. I don't think it's only driven by finances, but I think people's conditions, as Zaki very rightly said, we are a poor country, So the first thing is you get your roti, then the kapda, then the makan, right? And then after you've got the makan, then we'll start talking about, the aesthetics of it and all. So I think there's a long way to go. And another point also here is that the conversation on architecture, and I think, again, to a point Zaki made earlier about the government's interest in design, we need much more discourse and critical thinking about architecture. And I mean that in the news, in the broadsheets, in the dailies, not just ki kitne ka crore ka ghar banaya, not that. You need to talk about what the qualitative. We've become such a quantitative country that we'll talk about art only in the terms of the value of the painting, or the price a sculpture got at auction. And you'll talk about architecture either in again in terms of value, or in terms of just shine. But really thinking about it. And I think that is where the change will also start to emerge. It's not only these things have to be seen as a society from all aspects of, how society takes into it information.
So I think add one thing. Sorry, go ahead, Zaki.
Sorry. So what point I was just mind to make is that there's a fundamental thing across the world. Before architecture comes infrastructure. across the
Yeah.
world. That is when architecture gets developed because infrastructure is already made in place. That's how China's made new cities, right? They put the infrastructure in place. So maybe Delhi has got the best infrastructure in India, and maybe a distant second is Mumbai, and then everything else there's no number on it. But if you see it to any other country in like a Thailand, because I keep on saying Thailand because every time I go to Thailand and my aunt stays there, I'm there like 2 times, 3 times a year because I don't really get bad ideas why I go to Thailand. But it's that it just always makes me really aware of how badly planned we are and how haphazardly we're planning. How Matran said it very properly is that we make a room, then we make a room, then we make a room. We're doing the same thing with the infrastructure. So when we come to architecture, it's very, very far away from that. Our basic is, and somebody approached us to do affordable housing in Raipur. And I just think there was an X amount of money being put, and they said this is the X amount of money, but there was we also endemic problems like corruption. If the government gives an X amount of money to do something, there's an X amount of money which is even eaten away. So the money that the government was giving for that particular project was decent. But could I make something with that money? I would have made something. But if 15% is going away for something else, I'm basically left with. I was given something which was this little, and then I was taking 15% away from that for various other reasons. Then what you left with is nothing. So we have lots of systematic issues. So architecture is not to be blamed. We can all be crusaders for a cause. We all want to be crusaders and say we want to make better. We want to build better. We want to design nicer. But we have a lot of endemic issues and in our country, which it is part of a larger problem to solve.
I think, I mean, of course, like infrastructure and all these aspects will be there, but I genuinely feel that like our overall like inertness towards or like lack of value towards what we have is so prevalent that just like it's important that like how we value our cities, the way we put up the hoardings, the way traditional architecture is going down. I mean, it's just sort of somewhere subconsciously you are telling everybody that that's the value of your architecture. You have those shitty hoardings everywhere. You can't even see a proper cityscape. I mean, see, everything that you do to I mean, if there's a value towards your architecture, you would rather take care of it, but you won't put up a hoarding just like that anywhere. And most of our cities, what we see is like less of architecture, but like more of hoardings and advertising. So that says everything, then that's what people sort of take away end of the day. I mean, if you are valuing what you have, then the people will also sort of, value what you see.
This one is interesting.
You are telling them not to value it end of the day.
So yeah, going with your same discussion. Sorry, Zaki, go ahead.
See, he made a really good point on this. So about 2-3 years ago, we made there was a client who came to us with making a store in a 110-year-old building in Mumbai. And there were 3 floors of 8, 9 feet. So we convinced the client break and make 2 floors of 12, 13 feet. And we were very happy that we actually had a good conservation architect who happened to be my professor in college, and there were hoardings all across the building. We convinced the client, take the hoardings out, but the client would say that I'm going to lose money. But now that property is maybe 10x the price that he bought it at, because the building is now considered like a premium building in that area. Like this is called Amarchand Mansion in Mumbai. So it basically, people also need to understand what is the cost benefit analysis to good architecture. So look at the Zara store in Mumbai. So Zara store was a shitty building with so many things that were there. And this is that fort I'm talking about. They destroyed it, not a building out of Brussels or Denmark or someplace like that, right? And the kind of red that they getting is phenomenal. But people need to, if people in Marine Drive understood what is the net asset value that they're sitting upon, we would not be having this conversation today. Because it could be like Miami, where people be coming to take a bus drive from across the world to see so many Art Deco buildings to see across. But we Indians do not understand that architecture, or yet are trying to understand that architecture is actually also a possession, which is not only aesthetic, but it also can be of value to you.
So this next question is quite interesting. Is there a shift in percentage in the next 10 years? Can architecture pull the 99% towards that 1%? So I think all of you are open for this discussion because this is kind of critical. This goes, I think not only us as architects, but right from our government to our society overall and the environment, it has to change to make everything different.
Yeah, I think you answered the question.
That was a quick one, I think.
Yeah.
So, Matan, you do a lot of nice projects. You do a lot of art, and there are so many clientele that you cater to. Now, like Zaki rightly said about Marine Drive today, Marine Drive can be South Beach, Miami, for that matter, or Cuba, Havana, Cuba. So we tend to misuse that space because finally it is per square feet is what we are always looking at. So everything has got a monetary value to it, because of which we ruin each and every space. Like when we get some clients of ours who come with some extra luxury, big size apartments in Bombay, the only thing that they tell us is don't leave even 1 square feet wasted. But whereas they would still appreciate a fabulous mansion in Los Angeles and try to say that, wow, this looks beautiful. It looks beautiful because it's left empty, but just with the one piece of furniture there. So that understanding is very critical, because I see over time that the 99%, there is a lot of jump between the 99% to that 1%, but that 1% still does not understand design, does not necessarily mean money. It means a sense of understanding that design as well. Do you agree with that, Martin?
So I lost the audio on you for a little while, but
Okay.
it's an interesting point. I think I just mentioned it. I'll just want to, our education system is such that we become quantitative people, basically.
Yeah.
Everything is from science stream to commerce stream, right? So you understand that our lenses of understanding anything is totally quantitative. And that's true for everyone, from the government to the 1% to the person occupying it. So, when if I heard you correctly, you said a client would ask you to occupy or utilize every aspect
Inch of the space.
And I think Zaki gave a great example of like the building that you restored, and you got a sort of a greater value out of it. But I think that at the same time, this lens can only change if you kind of start to chip away at it, right? Like you chip away at it from the age of 5. You can't like expect people to change, because everyone is just counting. Everyone's like, "Acha, itna square foot, itna square rent, itna wo." I think that becomes a problem. So then, how do you kind of then do that? I think you see that with the developer projects in Delhi as well. I mean, I don't mean the big projects, but the ones where they take up plots and convert it into 3, 4, 5 apartments. It's exactly this. There's kind of no quality of life within there. The light, white, nothing is important. Just that you've got so many 1,000 square foot of apartment, and everyone's there with these tiny ceilings with the false ceiling and little glowing lights. So this idea of quality of space, that you designed a double height somewhere, you opened up a deeper veranda, you got a slightly less living space, but when you sit there, you kind of really get a sense of speed. All that's gone because the lens of everything, every aspect of our life, not only architecture, is totally measured through this quantitative lens, which we are taught through school and college. CBSE, ICSE, IIT, whatever, and medical, whatever we have to go through, right? Like it's all done like that. So then I think there becomes a problematic viewpoint to measure anything. So I didn't hear the rest of your comments on this part. I could kind of comment a little.
No, I completely agree with you. I think I would like to have a closing sentence over here. Let's not look at the catering to 1% as being the rich or the ultra rich. They are the 1% who understand design in a much matured way, where they don't want to look at a Pinterest or an Instagram as a reference point to look at their house as a design. Whereas it's more of a aesthetic and a creative sense, understanding the surroundings and their needs. Do you all agree with the same? Zaki, you want to say something?
Actually, my 1% also comes with Pinterest boards. So I'm very unlucky. You guys are lucky that way, I guess. My 1% come to it, and they also come and ask me for lofts in their apartments, because Malia, because they say कि इतना पैसा खर्चा किया है तो ये भी डाल दो हमारे लिए extra storage space. So
I think we can call that, we can push that 1% back to the 99%. The 1% let us look at as only people who understand the aesthetic value.
Yes. So I'll tell you. So what happens is, this gentleman asked that, is this percentage in the next 10 years going to move forward? We really hope it does. But so these are one of the things that I always have a talk with my builder friends or my businessman friends, etc. That the cost of real estate also is another driver for the price of architecture. So when the price of real estate in not Delhi, Mumbai, in Bangalore or Chandigarh for the matter being, for the per capita income that is there, is I don't think it's affordable. Like a 25 or a 30 or a 35-year-old can't buy a house in anywhere in India on their own money. That's why we stay as a nuclear family. We cannot be a nuclear family. We're always a joint families because there is, so architecture is not a problem solver. The economics is a problem solver for the world. Means I'm not saying that money. I completely agree with Martha. Is that just by throwing money doesn't make good design, but the whole environment and the ecosystem is, and like a safe society, like what Satyajit was saying, a developed society, a society which is evolved, can do much better than what we are today at. We'll definitely change. We are only 25 years in this game. We 1999 we started whatever we did, right? So we are relatively a young nation in this game. And I always tell my wife, India is the best country to be in right now because the opportunity that we have is endless.
Yeah.
Design-wise, opportunity-wise, everything. Because I think there's a lot going to happen. But also, what you have to understand is, for example, in Mumbai, you have to undo so many things to do something better. Like this Mohammadani Road, that area redevelopment talking about, how does it get redeveloped? Because there's so much chaos there. How do you undo it? It's easier to make a new city somewhere than to undo the chaos that we have in different urban pockets that we have. The same thing in every city that you go to, probably with the exception of Chandigarh. But so we actually have a problem at our hands in a monster that none of us really know how to solve.
But I think we're partly also responsible for this because our references are wrong. I mean, like we are constantly looking for something else, and we're not trying to understand the way we function. And that also happens in our architecture as well. It's so aspirational, and the aspirations are not like they don't respond to your like landscape. They're responding to something else which you haven't even seen in your entire life. I mean, in Pune there are like this apartment buildings which are called like Nevada and like Miami, and I don't understand. Like, I mean, half the times if you ask some like vegetable vendor outside, where exactly is this building is, he doesn't even know how to pronounce it. Even like the way people want to sell their buildings, like the whole like idea here is like you're trying to be something else, right from your architecture to everything. I mean, and you just need to sort of see what you have.
Like we are still looking west now. Sorry, exactly.
We have buildings in Bombay called Mykonos and Rivello and Postiano.
Yeah. And some buildings with some names which I can't pronounce.
Yeah.
So people have a problem to call the building Vasundhara, or Meghdut, because as Indians we want to really ape, and our culture is not really important to us. Sometimes I think it's very nationalistic to say, "Arey, hum to sab karega, hamara India kaisa hai." So like besides an architect, there's an architect called Shantanu Garg, who is very true to his Indian roots of design. I don't see anybody very true to Indian roots of design. If I show people work like this, ऐसा करना है जैसे हमको करना ही नहीं है. This doesn't come with what will we tell our friends? That kind of thing.
Yeah. And it's easy to convince them if you tell them I'm going to make an apartment which looks like something in New York. Oh wow, I want that.
Yeah.
Or London. I mean, we somehow we have got that love for the western part of the world. So, it's going to be. I mean, this debate will keep going forever, I think. So, I think any other last parting comment, Makran? You did not speak a lot today.
I think
you supposed to have 45 minutes.
But made me very conscious, so I was just like, I was just typing. I'm like, ज़्यादा नहीं बोलना.
Yeah. So, any last words from you?
No, I think that, look, I mean, to be realistic, I don't see that the trajectory changing at all in the next decade. That's kind of like my realistic view. The optimistic view, of course, is, I mean, I'm going by seeing the last 3 decades. I don't see this just changing unless there's a real phenomenal change, societal change, and those things don't really happen, in a span of a decade. And so the things are moving fast, and I think the infrastructure and all is it's kind of interesting and it's promising. But I don't really see. I think we will chug along at this rate for the next and incrementally improving. I think, as Zaki says, but I wouldn't expect any sea change. The optimistic view, of course, is that there is a change, and that the discourse happens, the education happens, and then the change happens. And like we're talking about, we have to change an entire generation before these things change.
Very true.
If anything, we're going backwards, because if you see who was designing our buildings in the 50s and the 60s to what they are becoming now, and what they were then, you see actually a certain regression in one aspect of the 99%. I think in the 1%, I think there are a lot of people doing very interesting architecture. Architecture, interiors, product design, that's definitely happening. And that's just sheer talent, right? That is there within the country. And I think that needs to be seen. It wants to be seen, so it comes out and it finds the clients, and it doesn't always have to listen to the client. It can, good architects, designers can convince clients to change their mind, do something interesting. And I think there's a lot of that happening. So in that sense, there's a lot of hope in terms of good indigenous design coming out of India. But whether the larger picture is going to change, I don't know. I'd probably remain a skeptic on that front.
I generally tell this to at times when I speak to students of designs and architecture in India. And 10 years ago, there was a boom in travel industry. People used to travel. If it was affordable, you could go as close as Thailand in just a fraction of money, as much as I could travel to Delhi or Nainital or somewhere. That changed a lot of vision, perception of how you want your space to be around you and your own house. That was one phase. Then the Pinterest and the Instagram, I think they added and they ruined it both for us. They added because they educated a lot of our customers, where we not tell them do it this way and because it's so and so. But it also made them they ruined it. Of course, today, like Zaki rightly said, somebody coming to you, even that one person coming to you and saying, "Mujhe loft chahiye," and you don't have an option, because that's the need. And so there is good and plus positive and negative points in both ways. How do we adapt to that? How do we educate them? And I think education makes a lot of difference, because that's where we can push our limits and give what we are supposed to do, and not what we can copy paste.
True.
True. And nowadays one can't even travel. I mean, I think I plan a 2 week to go to the local market, and that's a big family outing for us.
That's great. I was lucky enough this morning. I was able to go to the preview show of IKEA store in Bombay, which opened up this morning.
Okay.
So how was that?
It was beautiful, very well organized. They had they did take care of the COVID protocol by the government and had restricted people coming in. No two person were even coming close to each other, even by 6 feet. So that was, only thing they ruined was their cashier ruined it for 2 hours for me. So I had to rush and come back I was on time for this.
Yeah, I think IKEA is a really interesting point about where actually design becomes mass. We're not talking about architecture. They're a really phenomenal success story in terms of how they were able to bring a certain aesthetic, which was kind of seen as a very high-end aesthetic, at extremely affordable prices across the board. And I think it changed. If you look at interiors and how people's apartments started to change and houses started to change across the world, they are new to India, and it'd be interesting to see how that's going to impact. But I thought they were really, really successful in taking good design and affordable design out to a mass market. So
True.
It is also interesting to see how
IKEA has been. Sorry.
No, sorry.
No, IKEA has been booked. You need to pre-register to go to IKEA. Until 31st of December, you don't get a time slot to go to IKEA in Bombay yet. So that shows the success story, and I'm sure that's going to be another stage where it improvises our customers' understanding of a design or element. So this is our work. No more convincing them anymore.
Yeah, it will be also. I'll be keen to see how they respond to Indian market. do they adopt to this market differently? Like, KFC introducing like Jain burger and
They had
things like
chicken
that.
tikka. They had chicken masala meatballs. So I think they adapted well.
Yeah, no, I'm talking in terms of like the furniture that they,
Of course, I
yeah.
mean, yeah. So I
So,
think India was the first market, probably where they introduced steel utensils in their cookware section, because they never had steel utensils at all. It used to always be porcelain or China, bond China, some different material, but never stainless steel. So this is where they are starting a bit. So I think we can see matka pani also coming over there very soon. All right.
Well, Eames talks a lot about the matka in India during his time here, actually, as being this great symbol of great evolutionary design of a society. So it'll be great to see now the matka being produced by IKEA.
Yeah. So there is a question about IKEA. How do you think IKEA will impact within the Indian audience? So, Zaki?
My belief about India is that India takes a lot of time to get convinced by things. I think because the brand is so strong worldwide, I think it will do well because Starbucks has done well. You think Starbucks has great coffee? It's shit coffee. Indian coffee is so much better, right? Sorry, I'm using this word, but it's like no connoisseur of coffee drinks Starbucks coffee really in life, right? And chocolate mocha. Then you go have a dessert. Then you don't have a coffee. But international brands, because we are so awe of brands like Gora brands, I think IKEA will do well in India. As a country, we really have an identity crisis with ourselves. So we did the national headquarters for IDFC Bank. And the chairman was a big Modi ji fan, and he wanted an Atmanirbhar. I cannot ever pronounce that word. Self-reliant office. What is it called? Atmanirbhar.
Atmanirbhar. Yeah.
Atmanirbhar office. So we made his corporate headquarters very swanky, but with everything was Indian. There was no Gora material used except the network cabling. I think it was a phenomenal office that got made. It was spread about 60,000 square feet. It was a phenomenal space. Not a single client of every person who came from out of India loved that space. But when you take your other clients to see a space, not a single person in India liked that space. Because we as a country really like IKEA will do much better than a company in an Indian startup which comes up with great designs which are self-Indian ethnicity, right? Because we are a very Gora-centric thing, because our identity is not important to us as Indians, which it's more global identity or fancy name. So that's unfortunately how it's going to be. I didn't get a single client good review from that IDFC office that we made, which I think is one of the best projects we ever did in our life. Because शाबाश कौन लगाता है ऑफिस में, दीवार पे जाली कौन बनाता है ऑफिस में, कि कैसा ऑफिस है आपका? That's the kind of questions we got. So we just stopped showing that face. I'm super proud of the work we did. It's at a fraction of the price that we would do another corporate's work. IDFC had all the money in the world to spend 10 times the amount of money for their corporate headquarters, but they wanted to make a statement. So the statement was made to every person who visits from overseas, but unfortunately, a fellow Indian didn't like it.
This is also an interesting question. What kind of education can we include in the curriculum itself? I think this is to educate the masses. I don't know what kind of education do we call it.
We have to wait a generation for it.
I think it's really important. I think that you need to start to change this whole Marx-driven thing only, and you start to bring in like art, not just art. I'm talking about art, theater, dance, music. These things start playing a much more important role within education, because it's about kind of creating. So I think what's happened with as we said, with our education system, we are becoming lopsided. Like human beings come out, right? It's only driven towards number crunching and quantitative. So I think that when you bring in these kind of aspects, and there's a definite like caste system within education as well. You see. So that there's the physics and the science streams, and then there's a commerce stream, and then there's arts stream. Somewhere at the bottom end of it are the architects stream. Also half of the architects in the country are like people who didn't get into IIT and didn't get into this. then just before they did geography honors, parents said, "Beta, architecture kar lo." So there is, so because like it's true. I'm sorry. I really do believe this, that so I think that from a young age to take kids out to museums, take them to performances, bring architects into schools, show them buildings, talk about spaces. That's all it is. It doesn't require much more than that, but just it allows people to think in more abstract ways, in more different ways about, and it balances out human beings, I think. So I think it's really important that it starts very early. It starts in nursery onwards, And it's not just that art is that period where you do masti kind of thing. Art is a period where you actually create something, which is what it is.
Now I suddenly remember my school days.
Yeah, I mean, for us, that's what it was, till someone had some great teacher who came in and inspired them or something like that, and you sort of think, I think it's really simple. You have to bring it in as a serious subject, where it's not just about free form either. I mean, I think when people become creative and it's a part of the education, they have to be put on the spot to say, look, why do you think it's a good painting? Why have you made it? Just because you threw some paint on it doesn't make it good art. Like, so you engage people in saying that, now defend what you've done, talk about what you've done and how you did. That's what it takes. And you start it in the early years and you take it all the way through. And I think like American liberal arts education takes it all the way through into undergraduate years as well, where you could be studying philosophy while doing nuclear physics and studying French cinema at the same time. And I think that's a great way to go.
You need good teachers, like you need great teachers actually in the system.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's why I'm saying.
So Satyajit, actually what happens is that, the thing is that it starts in the school grade, in the first, second, third standard. But after that, my kids or my brother's kids are more interested in marks. As Matran has been saying all the time, marks milega acha to tum science karega, फिर तुम doctor बनेगा तो पैसा और बनाएगा. So it all goes to that philosophy. So it is very disheartening to see that, that everybody says, oh, you can bunk your art class, but you have to go for your French class or your Marathi class or your whatever class which gives you better grades, stuff like that. But, like the American system, he says is amazing, but, but there's some good light that comes from the tunnel. But, the thing is, for example, there are so many carpenters' kids, plumbers' kids, electrical kids I know of whose kids are now wanting to be architects or interior designers. Because for them, it's a one grade up from what their father's professions were, but it is also basically their perspective from what they've seen of their parents do. They're changing and upgrading themselves. So I think there is only no negative news. There's a lot of positive news also. So I've got like so many people I know, and I feel so happy to see that my carpenter kids are becoming architects or studying to be engineers. So it's a good thing. They could also have chosen to be doctors or something like that. But there's also some positivity out of it.
Yeah. Perfect.
I've become a carpenter and a plumber and an electrician after becoming an architect. Because I think every time a friend has a problem कि flush नहीं चल रहा है या बिजली में problem है, they'll start calling me. Right? So I'm going in the reverse direction now. Because they're also getting
all of us are. All of us are.
My daughter once introduced me to her teacher saying that he's a carpenter. So I still feel proud about it. I said, at least she knows I do something related to that. So it's perfect. All right.